Behind me is the second generation Kia Niro, and this is a big deal because it's launched here in Australia just a little bit after it's had its global debut. That certainly wasn't the case for the first generation car, which had a 3-year lag in electric guise in getting to Australia. Now the car behind me is the all-electric version, but Kia does also sell a series parallel hybrid, though the plug-in hybrid has been dropped from the range here in Australia due to slow sales. And in today's video, we're going to be checking out the flagship GT line electric variant, which has about 460 k's of range through its 64.8 kilowatt hour battery pack. And spoiler alert, the cabin looks way better than the car it replaces. But you can let me know your thoughts about the Niro in electric and hybrid guise down below this video. And if you haven't done so already, I'd also love it if you could hit subscribe to the Chasing Cars YouTube channel. If outside the new Niro looks like a development and a facelift of the old car, when you get inside you realise that this really is quite new from the ground up. The technology package really brings it up into the 2020s very nicely indeed. You've got a pair of 10.25-inch screens in front of me, one digital driver's display which is relatively customizable but still can't show a full map readout, but you do have this really easy to interact with and straightforward touchscreen that runs Kia's Android-based operating system that works fantastically. You have wired Apple CarPlay, which also works pretty well, and wired Android Auto as well, navigation, the sounds of nature, and a whole bunch of EV readouts. You can also adjust the climate controls through this 10.25-inch touchscreen. But thankfully, just like in the Sportage, Kia has retained a very clever little touch here. The shortcut buttons that either function as shortcuts for the whole infotainment screen, or you press this little fan, and this gives you the ability to interact with the HVAC controls, adjust temperature, fan speed, and all that stuff. And the fact that you have extra customization through the touchscreen, but still have really legible, easy to interact with shortcut buttons below that is a really nice touch. Adding to the ventilation, you've also got a heated steering wheel, which is lifted straight from the Kia EV6, which is actually very close in price to this vehicle. This car here, as it sits in EV GT line trim, is $72,100 before on-road costs. That's very close to an EV6 GT line rear-wheel drive, which is about $74,990 before on-road costs. And that is a little bit difficult because although this interior is really well presented and has lovely touches, soft touch materials up here on the doors and a general feeling of quality, and you've also got 3-stage heated seats and 3-stage cooling, the fact that this car is a little bit smaller than the EV6 means that it maybe doesn't feel like quite as good value as that car. But of course, you can't buy an EV6 in Australia at the moment. You can put an order in on one, but the order books are a long way ahead of production, where in theory, you should be able to go into a Kia dealer in the next couple of weeks and put your name down for one of these Kia Niros and get yourself one before the end of the year, though of course that's all subject to change as demand fluctuates and supply fluctuates. But yeah, definitely worth considering this thing if you are keen on an EV6 but can't get your hands on one, because the design in here is also fantastic. It really moves the game on from the car it replaces. These really cool seats that are, I think, borrowed mostly in terms of their design from the EV6 as well, with the cool headrests that function as jacket hooks. You've got this lovely dashboard, and the fact that the pair of 10.25-inch screens are built into the dashboard, not sitting proud of it, is actually something I really like. A little bit of ambient lighting too. It just feels classy and really a lot more elegant than the car it replaces. Like the interior, the Niro's exterior is much more exciting than before, but it's still cohesive. I really like the way Kia has integrated their design philosophy across a bunch of their latest models. The lights on this Niro look great. The sort of snowflake looking wheels are really cool. I love the integration of this indicator into the mirror, and as we get to the back here, there's a little bit of a flavour of original Audi R8 in the back here with this grey stripe. Of course, you can let me know if you agree with me down below, but at least it does have a functional vent for aero. So let's jump in the back seat. Now the Niro may be much smaller than the EV6, but the back seat is still very usable for 5 people in this car. It's pretty broad, and behind my driving position at 6'2", I have plenty of space, heaps of knee room, and a good amount of headroom, even under this car's sunroof that you get as standard in the GT line package. The only slight compromise is tow room, and that's kind of been the case for all EVs. With my front seat on the floor, I can't really squeeze my toes under there, and my knees do sit a little high off the squab given the skateboard of batteries underneath this car, but there aren't really any perfect EVs out there right at the moment that really solve that issue. Now, as for technology and niceties back here, we have simple things like a flip down armrest and things like air vents back here, but there's no way of controlling the climate. But if you download Kia's Connect services and link it with your Niro, this is the first car in Australia sold by Kia that has the ability to do this, you can adjust climate control settings remotely and even set the horn off from the other side of the city, which is all pretty cool stuff. You do also have nice touches like these charging ports in the back of both seats, and the front passenger seat has a cool relaxation function that means when you're sitting at a charger, you can chill out with the seat all the way reclined and relax while your car's charging. That's pretty rad. The only other small issue I have with the Niro is the fact that at 70 grand, I would like to see something a little bit nicer than hard touch plastics in the back. But on the whole, this car is really well packaged and thoughtfully appointed in the back seat. Around the rear, the second generation Niro benefits from being about 65mm longer, measuring 4,420mm, which is just a bit shorter than Volkswagen Tiguan. And it's a very nicely finished boot with a couple of cool touches, namely this parcel shelf, which is very small and very light, and actually sort of feeds into the philosophy of this Niro being lighter than its predecessor, not something you always see in contemporary vehicles, especially ones that have grown. It's about 80 kilos lighter than the vehicle it replaces, which is pretty cool. And some of that's down to this parcel shelf, which folds up very neatly into this little grey bag. It's not a parcel shelf that you could actually put parcels on, but it is a neat little modesty cover to keep prying eyes away from anything expensive you might have in the boot. Now, because this variant is the EV, there's no space for a spare tyre under the boot floor, but there are plenty of places to store your charging cables and also the cool vehicle to load adapters that come with this Niro. That means you can power a standard 3-pin socket either out of the front charging port or from under the back seat. So conceivably, you could grind and make your own coffee fresh if you're away having a picnic, and I think that's pretty rad. As for charging, the new generation Niro is slightly better than the car it replaces when it comes to DC fast charging. For 10 to 80%, it'll take 43 minutes on a 350 kilowatt charger or 45 minutes on a 100 kilowatt DC fast charger. As for AC charging, that can be done at a rate of up to 11 kilowatts, and from 0% to 100% it takes about 6.5 hours. Servicing the new Niro is more affordable than it used to be, owing to the fact that Kia now uses a less expensive coolant for the battery. So instead of over $3,000 for 5 years, the new car is only $1,754 for 7 years of servicing if you buy a prepaid service package. And of course, this car is backed by Kia's 7-year unlimited kilometre warranty with a 7-year 150,000 kilometre warranty for the high voltage electrics. The Kia Niro is really all about efficiency in this space, and the car behind me has a claimed 14 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres efficiency rating, which gives it about 460 kilometres of WLTP range. Now, we'll give it a proper range test when we get this car back to the roads that we know around Sydney to compare it against other vehicles, but that number on paper is right up there with the Lexus UX300e and is actually significantly more efficient than what the Kia EV6 in Air trim gets. That car gets about 17 kilowatt hours per 100 Ks. This car's 3 kilowatt hours better. Driving the new Kia Niro is actually a lot different to the car it replaces, and a lot of that's down to the fact that, unlike the previous car, which sort of came to Australia in a bit of a rushed way, this car has had Kia's full development program, their full Aussie suspension and steering tuning, and that makes a big difference. This is actually the first car since the COVID lockdowns kicked in early 2020 that's had Kia's full Australian suspension and steering tune. While the Kia Sportage midsize SUV got a suspension tune, it didn't get the steering tune, and that's really hurt it a little bit in terms of its handling prowess, and the same can be said of the EV6. But this thing has Kia engineers very proud, and that's pretty cool for a vehicle that might not be that exciting in other ways. When you get behind the wheel, it is actually really polished. But let's start by talking about the electric powertrain in this car, the EV that I'm driving. It still kicks out the same 150 kilowatts of power sent directly to the front wheels through a single-speed transmission, but it has lost out on torque. So it's about 140 newton meters down on the previous car, registering 255 newton meters to the front wheels. Now that's pretty weird for an update, but speaking to the engineers and the guys at Kia here in Australia, it's because of refinement. They wanted to make the Niro a more refined machine, more easy to use and more consistent around town, so you didn't have so much electric torque spiking up and making the front wheels spin up. And that was something that really affected the old car. If you caught my review of it a little over a year ago, you would have seen that, yeah, I did complain about that and a slightly lackluster traction control tuning of that vehicle. This thing is way more polished. It barely spins the wheels on a good grippy surface, and it just makes it feel a little bit more serene and with better power delivery. Of course, the relationship to torque and speed with a single-speed electric transmission also means that that drop in torque doesn't affect this car the same way that it would a combustion engine vehicle with multiple gears. So that's something worth taking into account. And the fact that at 7.8 seconds for a 0 to 100 km/h sprint, this thing's still pretty rapid for a small SUV, right up there with something like a Kia Seltos 1.6 turbo or a Hyundai Kona N-Line, something like that that's a little bit lighter. This car's 1,772 kilos in curb weight, but ultimately, yeah, about the same pace as a rival small SUV, and that's pretty cool. The next thing Kia's put a big attention to detail on is the refinement of this vehicle. By adding a lot more sound deadening to make it a bit more serene out on a country road like we are now, it's made it a more comfortable place to be, less tiring than the car it replaces, and feeding into that is the Australian suspension tune that I mentioned right off the top. This thing is a real peach. Yes, it still has a little bit more firmness than something like a Toyota CHR, which is a soft and slightly lollopy car, but that firmness means that this thing has great body control, and it's still nice and plush around town. Of course, we've been driving it around lovely roads just outside of Adelaide here today, but hopefully, and I reckon it will be the case, that when we get one of these things back to Chasing Cars HQ, we're going to be really impressed by the way the suspension deals with Sydney's rough urban roads, because it just feels way, way better than the car it replaces, and that's great. The other thing that feels way better is the way it handles. You can really tip it into a corner, and it's funny, you might not think that an electric power steering tune would make a huge difference to the confidence of a car like this, but actually, it really sharpens up the way it responds to the driver's inputs. That's all well and good for driving enthusiasts and people who like going around corners quickly, but it also means that this car is very consistent mid-corner. It doesn't do anything weird, doesn't get bucked around, there's no funny things going on through the steering, and the slight reduction in the amount of torque means there isn't grabby torque steer going on through the front wheels of this car either, so it just feels really polished, and I think out on an open road like this, it feels really confidence-inspiring. As I said, we'll have to wait for a proper test near Chasing Cars HQ to take in the worst of Sydney's roads before we make final judgment, but from a brief test drive, it's seeming like it's going to be pretty cool. Better than an EV6 perhaps even. It feels like it deals with its mass maybe a little bit better. Obviously it doesn't have the rear-wheel drive dynamics of the EV6 that make it exploitable and fun, and it doesn't have the power of the all-wheel drive car, and at the price that this Niro is set at the moment, that means that it may not look the greatest value on paper, but it's actually a really very polished EV, and I think a lot more comfortable than something like a Polestar 2. Now, let's talk a little bit about safety, because it's the final thing that Kia's really made a big deal about in the new Niro. There's a whole lot more safety kit, including front AEB with junction detection, cyclist detection, pedestrian detection. You also get reverse AEB, blind spot collision avoidance, and it's all the sort of thing that's going to help this car score 5 stars in ANCAP safety testing. It hasn't gone through the process just yet of getting its Euro NCAP score converted to ANCAP score, but it's looking like it's probably got all the stuff to get the maximum complement of 5 stars. And the fact that this body in white is actually a fair bit stiffer than the previous car, the car it replaces, which not only has benefits for safety, but also for the suspension, the handling prowess, and the overall refinement of this vehicle. So, the new Niro is safer, it drives a whole lot better, looks a whole lot cooler, and is just more polished in general than the car it replaces. Those are all great things, but is this the right car at the right time? When Kia's moving towards the nomenclature of EVs, following the EV6 with the forthcoming EV9 that we should see sometime this year, the fact that this Niro still exists is perhaps a little bit of an oddity. I know there's a lot of demand overseas, for example in Europe and in this car's home market of Korea, but it's going to be interesting to see in Australia whether buyers who have been waiting for their EV6 are going to want to switch over and have a look at this Kia Niro, which is probably going to be a little bit more available, at least initially. Kia plans to get around 75 cars a month in of this thing. The other thing worth considering is, of course, this car's hybrid variant, which has 104 kilowatts of power and 265 newton meters of torque, and can be had for under $50,000. That's a really good way to cut your emissions in the small SUV class, and yes, there are plenty of competitors there, so hopefully what we'll get to do is have that along as a bit of a wild card in a twin or a triple test sometime soon back in Sydney, and evaluate how good Kia's hybrid system has gotten over the years. But for now, the Kia Niro is still a bit of an oddity in the market, but at least it is a much better sorted oddity than it was before. The ride, the polish, it's all so much better. But of course, I'd love to know your thoughts, so let me know those in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so, we'd also love it if you could subscribe to the Chasing Cars YouTube channel. As always, thank you for watching.